Born in Leominster?
Yeah, Leominster, Mass. My father, you know, fishing was bad in Nova Scotia, but they needed fishermen in Gloucester when my father first came over, and it was easy to come over. If you had your oilskins on the outside of your suitcase, where they just let you come, they figured you're going to Gloucester. Of course, he came before he was married, but then after he got married, my mother, she was a school teacher, and she wouldn't let him go fishing. She said all fishermen got drowned. She didn't want to be left with children. So he started over. And he and a brother bought a piece of property in Leominster, which was a mill town, then a very much mill town. And he bought a 3-decker for an investment. Then I was born and lived in that 3-decker, but I don't remember much about it. Then my father moved next door. He bought another house and he moved next door. Meanwhile, he was working in a shirt shop. Well, he worked in Whitney Carriage and shirt shop, and they did piecework. Well, it's funny. On one side of the street we lived, the Burgalts and the Burgoynes and the Bedoynes and all those lived. They were all French Catholics. On the other side of the street, the Markhams and the Sullivans, they were Irish Catholics. And my mother was a Baptist, my father was Episcopal, but my mother sent me to the Baptist Sunday school. And when they found, and this is back, you know, when I was 5 or 6 years old, but it's hard to remember now that things were that bad then. Kids would come by the house and they yell, "You Protestant son of a bitch." And, you know, I went to Spruce Street School and I had to run all the way to school to get from beaten up. So my mother didn't care for that. And she was substitute teaching school. And she demanded that they move. So we finally moved to the other side of town, to the west side. And French Hill was on the east side. And I lived up by the high school. My father built a new house, which was sort of rural then, but of course sprawl had even started then. Houses built on either side of us. It was funny. I always had a feeling that somehow the kids I went to school with on French Hill resented that I moved to the other side of town. They sure treated me different after that.
Leominster was a mill town, right?
Yeah, celluloid. DuPont Viscaloid was a big place, but there were a lot of small factories around. You know, like Goodjule and Earls, they owned factories. And then there was a Cluett and Peabody where my father worked. He and his brothers all ran schooners, and when the bottom went out of fishing, well, they came over here. Most of them went back, but they came for a while anyway. Then my Uncle Everett, for whom I'm named, he died in 1911. It was a funny thing. When they were 18, 20 years old, they fished out of Lunenburg, and I think it was called the Nataska or something like that. Anyway, the captain was the captain, the father of the captain of the Blue Nose. Angus Walters. Of course, he was their age. So they shipped under his father with him as dory mates, you know. Matter of fact, they always say they caught more fish than he did, so they had to get off the boat, change to another boat. Well, anyway, in 1966, I think it was, in 1966, I was in Nova Scotia, and I said, gee, I'm going over there and see Angus Walters. I had met him once before when the Blue Nose was being, well, he was trying to raise money for the Blue Nose, and they needed $7,000 to pay for the engines they put in her. And you could go aboard for 10 cents. My father went aboard, you know. So that was that was way back in the 30s or something like that. Anyway, in 66 I was down there, and everybody said, well, he's a salty old guy, you won't get any information out of him. So I said, well, I'm going to try. So I went over and knocked on the door, and I had my little speech prepared. I thought, you know, his daughter, he lived with his daughter, he was 80-some years old, 85 or something. And I said, she'll come to the door, and then I'll explain who I am and what I want. Well, I was surprised. He opened the door. So there I was, all my prepared speech was all for naught, because he said, hello, you know, what can I do for you? And I said, well, I'm Everett Boutillier. Oh, he says, you're not the one I used to know. And that was instant recall from, well, I say my Everett died in 1911, my uncle. And he was a guy, he died at 86, and that was about a year before he died. I mean, what a marvelous memory. And he said, oh, those Boutiliers, they're over east. Well, Chester, where my people come from, is east of Lunenburg, see? Oh, they're still over east, those Boutiliers, he said. And he invited me in, and we had a wonderful time. He showed me all his pictures of the Blue Nose and let me take pictures of him and with the pictures on the wall. And then he let me take, he said, I got something good I'll show you. You want to take a picture? So he went in the room, and he came out with 2 4-foot cups. They were the cups given for the international fishing race. And he said, now when you go back to Yankee Land, he says, you know, there's always been some controversy about who won these cups. But he said, when you go back to Yankee Land, he said, you take a picture and show it to these people. He says that I've got the cups and I'm going to have them till the day I die. That ought to settle that. And I got a picture in the house of him with the 2 cups, you know, 4 foot high, standing in between them. Of course, the Blue Nose never was beaten, really. Well, I had a double interest in him, you know. Not only that he was Angus Walters of the Blue Nose, but I had sailed in 1931 on the schooner Elsie out of Gloucester. And, of course, she raced the Blue Nose. And I was always interested in the Blue Nose.
So did your father end up fishing, and you fished with him? No.
Well, he had fished with him, but he didn't. You know, my father came back to the States and stayed in the States. My Uncle Everett would have stayed in the States too. They became expert then at ironing shirts. And then as I came along, when I got of age, my earliest remembrances is my father working at Whitney Carriage. He had charge of a room of people who put together carriages. And he always was interested in young people. In Troy, New York, when he was ironing shirts out there, Cluton Peabody's out there, why, he worked at the YMCA, and in 1910, Dan Beard and Thompson and some others invented Boy Scouts. And my father was struck right off with Boy Scouts. He said, this is a wonderful program. He said, the YMCA has got its limitations. Now, this is 1910 when he thought this. He said, in 1910, they're spending all the money on buildings. They're going to have gymnasiums and everything. He said, they don't have much to spend on the boys. So he decided he liked the Boy Scouts, so he started a troop. 6 months after Scouting was founded, he was a Scoutmaster. And of course, having worked in the logging woods in the winter and having worked, he navigated ships and everything, schooners, he had a great deal of practical knowledge, and he could do all kinds of knots and splices and everything like that. And he took a lot to taking fellows out hiking and stuff like that. Well, when he come to Leominster, after he was 15 years older than my mother, and after he got married and he settled in Leominster, well, they had a big troop there that they had started, and it was falling apart. It was mostly a gym class. The guy had been trained at the YMCA. Well, my father went to help, and the first thing he had the troop, and the next thing he had 64 boys in one troop. And then different other churches, that was in a Unitarian church, and other churches decided they wanted to have a troop. So they asked my father to help out. Well, pretty soon he was helping with 8 troops. And first thing, they had a guy from Dartmouth College come down to be a professional, a Boy Scout executive. And he got lost. He didn't get very far. A couple of months he was gone. And Billy Holman was a big boss at the Whitney Carriage Shop, and he said, Dad, he said to Ted, they called my father Ted, he said, Ted, you go up and take that job. My father said, well, I can't do that. He said, I've only went to school in the 6th grade. And he says, I can't do all that stuff. And they said, oh, yes, you can. Ted, he said, well, Billy Holman said, you go ahead. He said, because your job will be ready for you if you don't like it and you can't do it. If you find out it's too much for you. So my father took over and he founded the Wachusett Council, and he founded Camp Lenosset, which is still going in it's on Thorndike Pond in East Jaffrey, New Hampshire, on the border with Dublin. And as I say, it's still going, and his foresight is one of the reasons. He went 12 miles in the woods to have a camp. My father had an idea that boys shouldn't have mothers around, that boys should get away from their mothers as soon as possible. And of course, he took kids at 8 years old, which Scouting didn't do then. But he had sometimes 300 boys. And everything in the camp was built by boys, no professionals. And he led until he retired. He was 70-some years old when he retired. And he had more boys per 100 population than anybody in New England, and 3rd in the country. So he'd done pretty good for a fellow without formal education.
And you became a Boy Scout yourself?
Well, yeah. I was brought up, and every Friday and Saturday night we camped out. And there were 45 troops by then. And we never got, well, they had a rating plan, and you got so many points for every mile every scout hiked, and you got more for an overnight hike. And my troop was Troop 7, and we never got defeated. We always won the hiking and outdoor reward. I got to be an Eagle Scout when I was 13, but I had to wait 6 months before they could give my badge to have leadership. You had to give so much leadership. Yeah. So when let's see, I was teaching school for a while, but I had a chance to go to the National Boy Scout Training School at Mendon, New Jersey, the Mortimer Schiff Reservation. And I went down there for a month. Of course, I'd been brought up with it. And my father did more Dan Beard type of scouting than they do today. And I'd been brought up in it. I was kind of surprised when I got there. The war clouds were gathering, and most of them were old school teachers. And there were 42 of us there, and only 2 who were going to put the out in scouting had ever slept outdoors on the ground overnight. Out of the whole 42, there were only 2 of us. I couldn't believe that. They were a nice bunch, though. Yeah, I remember one fellow named Davis. He came from Harlan County, Kentucky. He'd been clerking in a store, and the company store. He said when he grew up, the only choice was to work in the coal mines and pick slate out of the coal, do jobs like that, and dangerous jobs. And he soon found that the best way to get by in Harlan County, Kentucky was to work for the company in the company store. It was safer. Well, then, of course, he got ambitious. He got interested in scouting, and he had a chance to go to the training school, so he did, and I met him there. He was a nice guy. And, of course, scouting actually paid better than teaching. I left Amesbury, Mass. in '41, and I doubled my salary by becoming a scout executive, and I got $400 for driving my car besides. And I had my own office in Waterville. I was my own boss. I had to work. Once a month I met with the Maine Pine, I can't think of the name of it, Pine Tree Council, I guess it was, headquartered in Portland. Once a month, there was 6 or 7 of us. We all got together once a month. Otherwise, I used to visit about 45 troops a month up in Waterville, Skowhegan, Bingham, Madison, Anson, Pittsfield. I had all those places. And I was going real good. And then I liked to play basketball. And I was playing at the boys club in Waterville, and the war had come along. And Orrin Shiro was the coach at Coben Classical Prep School, and I guess he went into the Navy or something. And they had Coben Classical always had ringers. They always imported a couple, just like MCI. They imported a couple of good ball players. Well, 5 of them got drafted. So here they had a small team. I think I had 6 people when I took over, and they asked me to coach it. I was playing anyway. So they had me coach the team, and I did that. And we had over a 500 record, and we beat MCI, which was the big game of the year, which we weren't expected to beat. And we even beat Colby Freshman the second game. The first game, they drubbed us. But by that time, I had a chance to get things together. And through the war, Machine Gun Michelson was a freshman. I can't think of his real name. We call him Machine Gun Michelson because he just kept shooting at the basket from any position, but he could make them. And anyway, when Mike Labes took over, the coach went to war, and Mike Labes took over as varsity coach, and then he took the star, Michelson, off the freshman team, and when he moved them up to the varsity, well, that let me play the freshman team. We played the freshmen, and of course I got even. We beat them by 30 points. It was quite interesting. But my son was on the way. I had a daughter, and my son was on the way, and it looked like I was going to be drafted. And I couldn't, it was hard for me to get tires and gasoline, for doing my job. They had rationing coming on. Then one time we were down at Portland, and I heard that the boss, Skipper Patrick, who ran Camp William Hines too, and he had got a job with the Red Cross. They were hiring a lot of people, and I guess he saw I was going to be trouble how to get volunteer scoutmasters, when everybody was going to war. Anyway, I found out that he'd got a job with the Red Cross, a regional job, pretty good job. And I thought, my father told me when the captain gets off the ship, you better get off. So I went down the ironworks and walked in. There was a line, I don't know how long, must have been 50 or 100 people in the line, personnel office. And I said, I never stand here all day and I don't get a job even. So I went over and I talked to a guy who was a guard named McDonald. And I said, Ross, I said, what's a good way to get interviewed in here without standing in this line? He said, well, have you ever been a newspaper reporter? I said, sure. I had done a lot of work for newspapers, but I hadn't been a newspaper reporter. So I said, sure. Good, he says. Now, he says, just go in there and tell somebody that there's a guy there. He says, tell him you know Beanie Stover. Of course, I didn't know Beanie Stover, never even heard of him. So I went over and told a guy, I says, I'm a newspaper man, and I know Beanie Stover. He had been a reporter for the Maine Times. And he told me, he said, go right in. He says, he'll like to see you. So I went in there, and there were three guys there. One was named Brown, and one was named Fenn, Connie Fenn. Well, he'd been a classmate of mine at Dartmouth, and he was there, and of course he dropped out and come over and shook my hand and say, hey, Red, how are you? Gee, he gave me quite a hand, quite an introduction. And then the third guy was the smallest guy, was Beanie Stover. Well, so I walked out, I had a job. And it's the only time, other than looking good on my resume, it's the only time that Dartmouth ever really helped me get a job. And it was kind of funny. And so I got a job for Dunk McGinnis in the outfitting department. And that was sort of a production expediter. You know, those little birdhouses that sit above the ship, and you're up there climbing the ladder and going down and checking everything. And I was making $42 a week, and my family couldn't find a place for them to live. They were living in Waterville. I had to go back home every weekend, and it was miserable. So, and then, of course, my wife was pregnant besides. So I stayed there 4 or 5 months. And then I found out a welder to start in got $20 a week more than I did. So I said, well, boy, I'm for that. I figured I'm never going to have a career as a shipbuilder, so I'm going to get all the money I can get while I'm here. So they said, oh, you won't want to lay down that steel. A guy with you with a couple of college degrees and all that stuff, he said, you don't want to lay down there. I said, oh, yes, I do. And I said, $20 a week more. I said, that's keeping me alive for now. I said, that's my biggest worry. And so I went to welding. I got to be a second-class welder. And I put in ideas on doing jobs and stuff. In fact, some of them they do today, but I remember they gave me a $100 war bond. Lance Cooper was the lead man. And he gave me a $100 war bond and called me up to the office. And I said, well, it's easier for everybody, especially these women, to weld on flat instead of doing up and down, verticals and horizontals. Weld on the flat work, and then take the whole piece of the ship and put a crane and put it on the ship. And instead of having everybody on the ship welding up and down, he thought that was worth $100 anyway, a bond, and it was kind of funny. And then he even, at different times, the Harvey Welding Supply Company in Boston were looking for a man, and he sent me down there. He wanted me to become a salesman for them, but I said, Lance, I'll get drafted if I go to be a salesman. I said, anybody can be a salesman. They don't need young men to be salesmen. But he said, you go down anyway. So I went down, and they offered me a job, and I kept saying, well, you keep me from being drafted? I said, I don't want to go to war till my wife has this baby, because we had a lot of trouble with the first baby. And they said, oh, guess you couldn't do that. So I said, well, I guess I won't take the job. So I went back to welding, and I was walking down the deck one day, and a couple of guys got friendly with, they were painters, and they had dropped the contract on the deck on the Bath Iron Works, and the contract had small print down the bottom that 1/2% of the cost of building a destroyer is allowable to the Bath Iron Works for employee recreation. So I said, gee, that's right up my line. So I wrote a 7-page report, and I went up, and at the time they didn't like anybody with dusty old overhauls going up the top side. But I walked right up to Archie, Maine, and he was a executive vice president under Pete Newell for the ironworks. He was a tough old guy, worked his way up in the shipyards in Scotland. Very interesting man. He also was the president of the YMCA, and I'd been working there nights for Bill Perkins. So I had kind of met him a couple of times at the desk. He was always coming in there checking things. And anyway, I said, did you know that the ironworks could have a recreation department here and it would be paid for by the government? Boy, his Scotsman blood showed then. He said, he was all ears. And I said, here's what I figure you can do. I said, you could run some midnight dances for the swing shifters. I said, and things I'd been reading about in other union papers and stuff. And I said, you could serve meals, you could do a lot of things. Well, they had bought the church that was in the parking lot. And a man named Wolstenholme was the minister there. And he'd worked for nothing for so long for that church. I think it was a Universalist church, that when they got to settle up, he owned the church. So he sold it to the ironworks. He was quite an interesting man. His wife also was a night supervisor at the hospital. And he was a real interesting man. I wish I'd got to know him better, because he did tell me one day how he came from Sydney, Nova Scotia, and he worked in the coal mines when he was a kid, separating slate from coal, and he decided he'd go to college, be somebody, and he did. And I guess he worked so hard, he was pretty well tired out by the time he got through, but he got to be a minister anyway. And he was a great orator. And he was quite popular at the Elks Club or the Lions Club, all those places for giving speeches, and stuff like that. Very interesting guy. But I didn't really get to know him as well as I'd like to have. But anyway, he sold them the church, and they took the steeple off it, and they opened up a hall, and we ran wrestling matches, boxing matches, and we served 700 breakfasts and 300 dinners. We had a cafeteria in it, and then down below we had sort of a training room, a shower room, and we had lockers for they had a band, musical band, for the uniforms and stuff. And well, I told Lance I was quitting my welding job and going to work for the personnel department. Of course, I thought I was. Well, when I woke up Monday morning, I had to go back to welding. The Beanie Stover put out the company paper, and it said, new program for Bath Iron Works. J. Donald Brennan, Augusta native and former big league pitcher for the Giants and Cleveland and the Yankees, will be director. There was my job. So I went back to work. In about 3 months, he was an awful good guy, but he chewed about 9 cigars a day, and he really liked to drink too. And he had a lot of stories to tell about Babe Ruth and everything else. He was an interesting character. But anyway, he could pitch 4 or 5 innings, and there never be any runs. And we kept with him running the baseball team. We got a baseball team, and we kept winning the New England ship and Varney Mills over in Brunswick. They all had a team, and we won the league all the time. And but anyway, in about 3 months, he was into trouble with the union and all different things. So he did. Buzz Cooper, who later became chief of police at Bath, and was a real screwball character, but he was an outfielder on the baseball team, and he wanted the job. And a union guy, Frank Lehane, wanted the job. And Don didn't want to have anything to do with the union, and he didn't, well, as I say, Cooper was kind of a wild guy, and he didn't want him. And he called me up and he said, hey, you working at the YMCA and your name came up. Would you like to work for me up here in this recreation department? I said, well, I was wondering why you called me. Well, he says, what do you think I should be doing? He said, they say I'm not doing enough. So he said, what do you think? So I started telling him this and that and that. And I said, you know, there's a group here that they like to be performers on the stage. You could run a dramatic group and all this stuff. And he said, did you ever see this? And he pulled 7 pages typewritten out of his desk. I said, yep, I recognize it. I said, you don't have to show it to me. I wrote it. She said, well, you know, when they gave me this job, they said if I do everything that was on here, he said, they told me everything would be okay, just to follow this. It was my plan. They gave it to him. Of course, he lived in Augusta, see, and that was kind of, kind of a nuisance. He had to go back, and his wife worked for Central Maine Power. His daughter still lives there. And so I said, well, I wrote it. So he hired me. Well, we ran a big tournament. We had Craig Juggenstaden and Craig Wood and some of the big, and the Jones brothers who came from Maine. And we ran a big golf tournament out to the Bath Golf Club. And so we kind of ran things for the employees, but then we had to run things like we ran wrestling matches for the lead men, all the supervisors, and stuff like that. And he got kind of celebrating at the golf tournament, and then he didn't come back from Augusta. Well, I was waiting for him, and they were calling. They wanted him, so I says, I think he's out to Kelly Field running the lines on the baseball field. And I had no idea where he was, but I didn't want to say. And he turned out he was up the Calumet Club in Augusta. He'd got drinking with a few of them. I finally got through to his wife. It took him a couple of days to show up. I don't know what happened, because the first thing I know, they called me and said, well, you'll be running this program from now on. And a few days later, he called me up from the Augusta Hotel, which it's gone now, but it was right near the courthouse, State House. And he called me, he said, come up today, he said, I want to see you. So I said, well, okay. So I drove up that night, and went in. He said, now have anything you want, he says, but make sure it's Ron Rico. I said, Ron Rico? I said, anybody drink that stuff? And he says, I do. And he pulled out a card. He had a new job. He was a representative for Ron Rico. And on the back it said big league pitcher, and all that stuff. And he hadn't been out of job 3-4 days. And he had a job as Ron Rico. He was quite an interesting man, though. But when I became after the war, I could see things were...
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was trying to think.
We were at Bath and Brennan had shift to Ron Rico.
Yeah. Well, as I say, then I had 11 months alone. I ran the program by myself. And then I started to sense that the war was over. And, well, it's kind of funny. I did get called for the draft, and I went down to Portland to Fort Preble, and I walked in there, and there was a guy sitting, kind of looking into space over the water and everything, sitting there, and he was a guy who was a classmate of mine at Dartmouth, and he'd just come back from service in the war. He'd been a flyer, and he was pretty well worn out. But anyway, I thought, funny, he was just about the end of it, he was worn out, and here I was about to start my Army career. And I went in, and I had, of course I have a hoarse throat, I guess something when they took out my tonsils when I was a kid. Anyway, I thought, geez, the doctor, look at that throat, he'll want to know something. He said, oh, that's nothing. Geez, you'll do well in the Navy, he said. So they passed me. So then I reported back to my draft board, and Dr. Joe Smith was my doctor. And of course my son hadn't been born yet. And he said, well, you're not going anyplace because she's having a tough time. He said, so he deferred me till after the baby was born. Well, of course, by then, by the time the baby was born, the war was over. So I never did get to go to the war service. But at that time, I started thinking, I knew I wasn't staying on in the shipyard. And it's kind of a confused place. I never really got used to it. And there was so much noise and stuff. I think that's why I'm deaf today. Anyway, I started thinking, well, meanwhile, my wife's father had retired. He was a head of the public speaking department at Dartmouth. And he was from upstate New York, and he'd moved down to Ithaca. He'd retired and moved to Ithaca. And my wife, it was always going home, bringing the kids, and everything. And I thought, well, I better just move someplace closer to them. So I wrote around, and I wrote to the Frank Gannett newspapers in Rochester, New York, a man named Blanchard. And he said, we got a job for you. He said, he had me fill out a thing, and he said, we got a job for you in Saratoga, New York, if you can be there Monday morning. So I went around the building. That was like in the middle of the first of the week. And I went around the building, and I got all the keys, and I got all the uniforms, and I got everything all lined up, and all, left all my files and newspaper clippings and everything proper in my desk. It was in the lobby. It was in the balcony of the old church. And so then I was kind of embarrassed. I had to be there Monday morning in Saratoga. So I went into Paul Akeley. He was a assistant personnel director. And he had told me, meanwhile that week, I guess it was, he told me, he said, well, you'll probably be all right because Bill Perkins likes you down the YMCA, and they think they'll get a job for you down there, Mr. Maine said. And I thought, well, I'm not going down there because Bill Perkins is going to stay there the rest of his life. And he did. I was away 14 years, and I came back, and he was still there. But anyway, I said to myself, I said, I got to get on the hump. So I got everything ready after I got this word from Blanchard. And so I went into Paul Akeley, and I said, Paul, I said, don't worry about it. He was real worried, He said, well, they said you could, take a month or 2 or 3 weeks or something. You don't have to do this hurry. And I said, well, would it be all right if I could leave Saturday? And he said, oh, he thought I got mad. I said, no, I'm not mad. I said, just embarrassing. I got all the keys here and everything to the building, all the reports and everything's here. He said, well, you've been preparing for this. I said, yeah, I'm going to work Monday morning in Saratoga, New York as a sports editor of the newspaper there. Which I did. Yeah. Well, as sooner or later, Paul Akeley got laid off. A lot of other people were getting laid off. And when I was away 14 years and I came back and I was walking down the front street in Bath, and there was Paul Akeley. And so we had a little chat, and he said, well, you came back. I said, yeah, I decided I like Maine. I came back. But he says, well, I'm still there. He says, I got laid off, but I've managed to get back on as things picked up. He said, of course, a lot of people had done that. And I guess he died. I remember reading in the paper when he died. Yeah, on the job. But that was 1959. I've been back 41 years.
So you covered the horse racing beat?
Oh yeah. Well, at Saratoga, I learned a lot about harness racing because they had a track harness racing at night, and in August in the daytime they had the running races. So I covered Assault and all those big guns, Arcaro and all those jockeys. And right now I just can't think of them all. And I got to know quite a lot about him, and then I played a lot of basketball, and I helped organize, our team. We had a professional team there, and we had a convention hall. I think it burned down since, but anyway, we had glass backboards, and we had seats with arms on them, real comfortable place it was. And we had a team called the Saratoga Indians, a pro team. Most of the guys were from New York and played in a league. We played Utica and Mohawk and Glens Falls and Johnstown. Had a farm league like. But they were all college players from Syracuse and Colgate. We had some good players. Anyway, so we promoted that, but then we promoted a team called the Spa Vets, because we had guys even gone to Colgate and played for Colgate, like Vic Hazard, guys like them, and Chris Correa, and they were just laying around on their, what was it, they had some kind of a check you got as you got out of the service. They were discharged, and a lot of them were working in the horse rooms. Saratoga was a real interesting place. Governor Dewey, the bracket buster, was governor, and his publicity man, can't think of his name, Haggerty. Haggerty was his publicity man, his press man. And when Dewey ran for president, Haggerty was supposed to become the publicity man out of Washington, which of course Dewey had pictures made of him milking a cow with his suave mustache, and then him milking a cow is kind of ridiculous. And then he also listened to the housewives, and they let him put the yellow coloring in oleomargarine, which all the people in upstate New York, all the farmers in upstate New York were against that. They knew butter would sell if you didn't have to fuss with it to put this yellow coloring in it, see? And anyway, Dewey went for that. Of course, he lost the state, and he didn't get elected. Years later, I met Haggerty again when I was living in Clinton, New York. Haggerty had a son in Hamilton College, and I met him at the Alexander Hamilton Inn. Boy, I guess he got sick finally, but he used to drink. Part of the name was Robin. I can't say the name of the drink, a cocktail. It's scotch and something else in it. Wow, I don't know how he got it down. Well, he used to come to meetings. Well, the thing was that all the horse rooms in Saratoga were wide open. It was just like Las Vegas or someplace, see? Well, of course, we had to run them. We had to not have much news on it, not much publicity, because it would be embarrassing to Governor Dewey, who was governor in Albany, 30 miles away. And of course, they had to get political contributions, and Haggerty used to come up. He was the bag man. And he came up, and I remember we had a meeting with some of our staffers and with Jess Kavanaugh, my editor, and we had a meeting, and it was decided that we would not publish anything about Riley's Lake House and Intervale and Pipe and Rock and all the Newman's Lake House and all the gambling places that were going on. One night at Piping Rock, Josh Whitney, who owned the Herald Tribune, he lost $60,000 one night there, and we couldn't publicize any of that. Well, that was kind of too bad. But anyway, Sergeant Eichmann and Sergeant Cunningham used to drive a riot, have a car, and I rode with them a couple of times, and they'd go around to the nightclubs and collect the money at night. I often wondered why there wasn't a robbery there, but evidently all the people that were crooked knew about it, and they didn't want to disturb these places. But anyway, I remember the two cops on Patty Rocks was the chief of police. He was a friend of mine. He was a great guy, and he came from Philadelphia. He looked like a good bartender. very white-haired and very sedate, and he looked like a bartender, but he was a chief of police. But anyway, they had scatter guns and everything, and they'd go around and collect all the take from the Intervale, Newman's Lake House, and all those places, and they bring it in and put it in the Adirondack Trust Company every night. And the police collected the take. That made me kind of a cynic, you know. I said, Dewey the racket buster, and here was all this going on, you know. But anyway, that's politics. Yeah. So we all got, staffers all got passes to the races. You tore one off every time you went in and so forth. And I never did get one. Just everybody got to know me. They let me in anyway, and I always was curious. So one day, Peter Hofseth was a deputy commissioner of public safety, and I saw him at the races one day, and I looked over. He had one of these tags hanging there with the tear-off things, and it was mine. And they gave them all. That's before New York State got so strict, and they gave all of us on the paper a free pass, you know, that would get you in and out. But we never got them. They passed them out to guys in City Hall. So all the guys in City Hall were going in posing as they were newspaper men with a press pass. Oh, there's a lot of things you see. Jack Peppers, and I don't know, I liked 21 Club and Allie White's and Dave Kirker's La Cafe. These are all horse rooms. At Jack Peppers, you'd go in there, and there was a little store on a corner, and you went in there, and then there was a place only room for one person to go by, and a man stood there selling cigarettes or something. And if he knew you, he'd let you go by, and you'd walk in a room, and there must have been 300 or 400 people in the room, off-track betting, you know. And the guy, Hank Levitt, last time I saw him, he was a bartender in the Shamrock years later. But anyway, Hank was walking on a big walk, you know, an uplifted walk, and he'd go back and he was calling out all the races, and you could bet anything you wanted. And you never signed your name to a slip. And the guys, and there's a lot of these guys that come out of the war, like Vic Hazzard and those guys, and Fleming, they were working there. It was the best job they could get. And they had to be kind of quick in the brain. But, you know, you never got a slip with any name on it. You had a white piece of paper. And if you won, you'd cash it in. And there was no records, or you couldn't tell who it was or anything. No matter, there was just nothing there. But you did have this white piece of paper that you written your bid, and they had to memorize it. And boy, could those guys use figures. Just ordinary guys, but from working in the horse rooms, they'd been brought up in it. They could really do all the multiplication, everything in their head, you know. These people with computers today never could do it. But anyway, it was quite an interesting experience. And I wrote the story when they tore down the United States Hotel. I got friends with the contractor who was tearing it down. In fact, he had a hobby of flying Piper Cub planes, and I used to go up over Glens Falls and those places. It was cold, I remember that. But I wrote the story. Of course, Red Smith and all the big sports writers in New York kept panning the facilities and the rooms and suites and things for tourists in the summer season, and they just kept banging away at it till they finally tore the United States Hotel down. I think it was a terrible thing to tear down. It'd been built in the Civil War, you know, the room. And the Grand Union, they kept that one a long time afterward, but that's gone now too. And I guess the Warden Hotel is the only one that has any name on it, any age. But it was built around a hollow square, and there was a garden in the square, you know, and all these verandas around. It was real old style, Civil War, you know. But of course the plumbing and stuff was, you know, twisted old pipes and stuff like that. But gee, I thought it was colorful. I couldn't believe they tore it down. But most of the fittings and hardware and all that stuff, and fountains and statues and stuff were all sold as antiques. So they're all around someplace. I saw one later on at Rome, New York, when I got out there. But I stayed from 45 to 47. I stayed in in Saratoga. I should never left, but they gave me a $20 a week raise to go to Utica. And, it looked big to me, $20, but see, I had these sidelines. I was connected with the pro basketball team and all that, and I should have stayed there. But I didn't know much about Utica. I thought it was bigger, and they had a team there, and I got connected with that too. But I was there about 2 weeks, and they put me on nights till 2:30 in the morning. And by that time, I had bought a house in Clinton, New York. That's the home of Hamilton College, and I bought a house there so I could move my family there. And it wasn't, I don't know, I didn't like Utica really. I lived 10 miles. I live in Clinton, 10 miles out of town. I had to go back and forth 10 miles. It wasn't so hot. And it was a bad town. The mills were all moving out and closing, and everybody was scratching and the politics was mean there. And everybody was scratching to make a living there. And then they gave Chicago Pneumatic, they gave them their taxes free for 11 years, and then they gave Bendix and one other one I can't think of up in the New Hartford. They gave them tax free, and I learned a lesson there. No town should give anybody tax free to get them in there, because the minute they have to pay the taxes, they moved, which Chicago Pneumatic did. They moved. They were on the border with Frankfurt, and they moved as soon as they had to pay taxes. And Bendix is gone, and the other one's gone too. So.
What brought you back to Maine?
Well, I think horse racing. See, in '53, I decided we got a new boss, and he wasn't very experienced, and I didn't like him. But I looked around, and I was the only guy. There were 14 on our desk, and I was the only one that had done every job on the desk. And I said, "Here we go." I said, "We're gonna get some new guys in, and I'm going to have to train each one of them, in addition to do my own work." And that kind of got me, and I was tired of it anyway. It was kind of boring. I mean, one night I had to go out to Columbia Circle to write a story. I wanted a feature story on this guy. This guy's terrific. He's lived here 60 years at Columbia Circle. He's worked in the brewery, Utica Club, and he goes to the pool room, and he lived right in that neighborhood. And I went out there, and that's all the guy had done. His whole life was right there. And I said, how am I going to write an interesting story about this guy? But I did, and I said, oh boy, I said, this is getting to the bottom. So I come in, and I said to Charlie Smith, the new boss, I said, Charlie, I think I'll get down. I said, I'm tired of this night racket till 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. One time they had a train wreck, 21 trains all piled up at a niter, and I was over there till 11 o'clock the next morning. Then I had to come back that afternoon. Well, anyway, so I said, Charlie, I said, I'm going to retire. I'm going to resign, not retire, resign. I said, you're keeping me so busy I don't have time to look for a good job. So I said, I'm going to, I want you to know, I said, do you want me to work 2 weeks or 3 weeks? I said, I've been with the company about 10 years. I want to have a good record. I don't want to do anything bad, to spoil my record with them. And I said, but you let me know. Well, he said, if you feel that way, why don't you get done Saturday? I said, good, sign this paper. And he did. He did. And I had no idea where I was going to get a job, but I said, oh boy, I'll get a job someplace. And matter of fact, I cut this story short. I came in, and Ralph Dibble was the state editor, and Homer Baker was the slot man. And Baker was from Cornell, and Dibble was from Syracuse. And I came in that day, and they said, geez, Red, we'll be leaving you. We're going to Buffalo. They both got a job in Buffalo. I don't know why they wanted to go there. It was so cold, but anyway, they'd gone. So there I really knew I'd done the right thing. the good men, well, we had a couple of good men, but they were like 78 years old or something. Bob Delaney and Claire Hayes, who was an interesting guy. He wrote all the Boy Alger stories, Claire Hayes, but he drank a lot. But he was, he was just living out his life. He told me how he used to get $200 a book from the publishing company, and he worked in St. Louis, and he used to go in the hotel room for the weekend, buy a bottle of rum, and sit there, like he wrote The Boy Allies in a submarine. And he never saw a submarine, but he used to read the Wire News, and he'd take all this stuff and make these boy allies and doing this and that. I got some of the books in here, and it was quite interesting, but he only got $200 a book. But, so I went home, and we had a hockey team, and I started taking pictures about this time. And one time I wrote a story on a kid from Holland Patton, New York. He was a future farmer of America. He hadn't graduated from high school, and he had $16,000 worth of cows he was taking care of every day. And a real estate guy had bought a nice brick home, but he didn't want the farm. So he let this kid, Lee Yutzler was his name, and he let this kid use the farm. So the kid owned all these cattle, but he didn't own any building or farm. And I thought it was quite a story. So I went up there one day in the day. I was always interested in the farms around there, and of course that wasn't my beat. So I went up there one day, and they allowed me $1.25 for gasoline. And I never forget that. I wrote the story, and then I thought about it, and I just had a little brownie camera. So I went to the dark room, had one of the guys make bigger pictures, and I sold it to Ford Farming Magazine for $125. And I said, uh-oh. I said, this is what I'm going to do. I said, see if I can find enough, the rural something. There were the American Agriculturist, and I found a whole lot of them. And I started writing to all of them, and I take stories, And then they had a pro hockey team in Clinton, New York, the Clinton Comets. In fact, my daughter named them. She won the prize for naming them. And anyway, I started working with them. They were all Canadian boys, And I got some work there, and then I had learned a lot of policemen, so I chase accidents with a camera. And I chase accidents, and then I'd take all the pictures to show one car was right, then I'd take it to show the other car was right, and then they had a clearinghouse over in Utica. So I'd call the clearinghouse, and then, of course, the key thing was, if the lawyer was representing somebody in the case, somebody got killed, you'd make some money because the lawyer would buy all your negatives. Then the court couldn't, what do they do? The court demands the negatives. Mm-hmm. They couldn't do that if he'd already bought them. So they'd pay you more money, you see. Sometimes you sold to both sides, sometimes you didn't hit, but I started doing that, and then I put a dark room in my bathroom, and so forth. And meanwhile, they started a racetrack, Vernon Downs. So they advertised they wanted a photographer. Well, I didn't have the equipment and stuff, but I thought, well, here goes nothing. So I went over. When I got over there, every photography shop from Syracuse to Utica, and maybe some others besides, independents, they all were over there applying for this contract to get the job. And there was a whole line of them there. And I said, oh, God. I said, I haven't got a chance. I said, look at all these guys. So I looked out, and the track had just opened, and there was a couple of guys out there. One of them was Charlie Schaefer from Saratoga, and they were out training their horses. It was a sunny day, and they were just training. So I went down and took a camera, and I said, I'll see how this goes, see what kind of picture I can get. So I took a picture of him, and then I thought, well, gosh, it's 9 o'clock in the morning. I said, look, I'll go home. I got in my car and I drove 8 miles home, developed the negatives, made a picture, and came back to the track. I got back around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and everybody was gone. the manager, Ed Keller, was there, and he was just closing up. And he said, "Oh, where'd you come from?" He said, "I thought I remembered you being here." And I said, "Well," I said, I figured you'd be tired of listening to all these guys tell how good they were. I said, so I went out and took this picture," I says, "and I went home and made it, and here it is." And I set it on the table. He says, "You're hired." He says, "That's what I want." He says, "I want a guy that goes and takes a picture and goes up and makes it." So anyway, I got the job. Well, it was sort of a concession, you know. I made all the tracks, all the pictures for the track to use in publicity, and a guy named Emerson was the publicity man. And so I ran the concession, took the finish, the race finish, and the trophy presentation in the winner's circle. Well, I did it that year. That was 54. And somehow that winter they let Emerson go, and they were looking for a new man. A guy named Quinn from Maine was supposed to get the job, and he didn't arrive. And so Ed hired me. He said, "You can do this job." He said, "You know all the newspaper men anyway." So I took the job, and I had it till 58. But then by 56, we built the trailer, and we started going. You know, I used to sit around. There was a few guys training there in the wintertime, and I'd sit around, and just for something to do, I'd go over and write a little stuff and put it in the Harness Horse magazine, the Horseman and Fair World, and so forth. And then I thought, geez, I'm not getting paid to do this. What's the matter with me? So I built a trailer, and then I went to Florida. I went to Pinehurst, North Carolina, and I went to Orlando, Florida, and where they were racing, and I could sell pictures. And so that's when I started going to Florida winters. I don't think the track liked that. They liked to have me around. I don't know why. But anyway, in 1957, I came back that fall, and I was supposed to get back in May, and I never heard from them. I'd gone to a meeting once with them, and I never heard from them. And I had one of the best records in the business. And I'd had over 300 pictures published on the Vernon Downs and everything. So they hired somebody else. He kind of got me. He was a mama's boy. So anyway, I had to hustle, so I had no trouble because I called up. Well, at first I had these recommendations, and the Harness Horse gave me a half-page ad for free. In fact, they put in some of their opinions of me, you know, and they explained that these guys let me go without notice. So anyway, of course, they fired Ed Keller the year before, so I knew they were house king. But anyway, I went to Hinsdale, New Hampshire, and we opened that in 58. Then that winter, I went to Ponce de Leon, Florida, and opened that. And then I had Boston in 59. I had Boston. And I was supposed to go to, I had been to Lexington in 56, but I was supposed to go to Lexington in 59 too. But I had other problems and I pulled out. I didn't go. Kind of wish I had, but because they started a museum there, but I didn't go. And my daughter was running around with a horseman, and I didn't like that idea too much. He was a groom. So I knew he was going to Lexington, so I didn't go. So we came home. But then they asked me at Lewiston and Gorham. They knew I had all this experience, so they asked me to do it, and I helped them till 62, I think it was. But every day I had to put out, I put out 30 or 40 addresses. They wouldn't buy an addressograph, and you know, I had to do all the work myself. In those other tracks, I had office girls and everything else. So, and I didn't get as much pay here, and I figured, oh my God, it's handy, but still. Another thing, you couldn't sell the pictures here that you could sell in those other places. In fact, when I got done, I had $200 or $300 worth of pictures that guys never came for. And the whole track setup wasn't on the same level as New York or Florida. Well, I'll just give you an idea. See, here's where I did all the negatives. And they say everything's disrupted. I haven't been back into anything. And see, we got three enlargers, and my trays are all under here. And here's stuff we got, see, stored. I mean, those all used to be full, but I've moved them. And here's like the clippings and everything from each year. I've got all that here. Here's a schooner I sailed on. Well, in '59, I was working at Foxborough Raceway, and we come every weekend. After the races closed at Saturday night, you know, we drive up here and drive around all day Sunday hunting for a place. And the year before, I had come up here and looked at this place, and of course I had to find what I could afford. And my wife came from New Hampshire, from Hanover, New Hampshire, and I knew she didn't like the ocean. And I'd like to have been right on the water, but of course that was out anyway. It cost too much. And I looked at this place, and I said, well, Jimmy wanted to have a lot of land. There's 100 acres here. So he wanted land, and I said, well, that's all right. But I said, oh, that hillside. And then I said, I can see this is a windy place. I said, we wouldn't like this. Well, make that as short. By the time I kept looking, I looked in Belfast, Camden. Camden was a swell place. It was cheaper than this, too. But the taxes were $1,200 a year. And to start off with, and there were 2 houses and a garden on and everything, but I couldn't really figure what I could do there. And so I finally came back to this place and I bought it. It's kind of strange because I said it has been windy. This last year, it's been windier than ever for some reason. I think the weather's changing. But of course, my son he was one of the first hippies, I guess. He wanted to have cattle. He wanted to go his own way. And that barn, we jacked that barn up. It was sitting on a side hill, and we dug out underneath it and poured all cement blocks around there and put a foundation under it. Now he talks about tearing it down. But he bought a cow, and she was bred over at Vaughan's, over in Booth Bay, East Booth Bay. She was bred, and the first thing we had 2 cows, and the first thing we had 6 cows, and the first thing I know we had 25 cows. And we had to make hay, and we had to go way up to West Waldoboro to get enough hay. There wasn't any hay around here. And we had cows that were born in the barn while we were building it. We had a bunch of cows in one corner, and we were laying cement blocks all around the rest of it. And as I say, he went to a lot of auctions. He got to know all the auctioneers and he still goes to auctions a lot. But of course, then we were selling cattle. We had dairy cattle for 10 years, and we had some good jerseys. One had 5.2% butter fat, and it was so rich that my wife couldn't make butter with it. And we had to pour milk back in it to make butter. And she used to make, in the wintertime and things were dull, she'd make a lot of butter and put it in the freezer. In the summertime, we'd run out in no time. One lady used to come here and she brought her own butter mold. She wanted her mold, her wanted round, her pound of butter in a round shape. And one time she called us from Chicago, sent a Western Union over to the drugstore, or Waltz's used to be the place to get your Western Union telegram. And I went all the way over. I thought, oh, maybe my mother or my sister's sick or something. I went over there, and all she wanted to have 2 pounds of butter ready for Thursday without salt. Strange. And my wife used to take, and she wrapped her butter in. They had a lot of people still making butter around up in West Waldeboro and places. But they didn't use refrigeration, and it used to be very strong butter. Old-fashioned was that way it was, but they kept the cream in the cellar stairs, and it would come out cheesy-like. Anyway, my wife didn't do it that way, and she wrapped it in a special wrapper that she had made. She didn't buy the wrappers that they sold at Agway or anything. She made her own kind of tinfoil wrappers and everything. And I don't know, I just took, we'd have 400 pounds of butter in the freezer out there on the porch, and in no time. Well, sometimes we had customers calling, and Anderson was a Finnish guy over in Thomaston. And he's dead now, but I used to go there because he remembered the days and all the harness racing guys raced up through here. One time Maine was the center of harness racing, in the 30s. And he knew all those old guys. Some of them since then had made $1 million, like Joe O'Brien. I go over there and talk to him, and his wife made Finnish. She made good butter, real good butter. And we'd run out, so I'd buy 100 pounds from him. And we still had people coming here for it. And then the milk, I'll tell you a funny story. Freddie Hilton, I used to go around, and my son or one of us would always deliver the milk. It was not pasteurized, raw milk. And boy, I liked it. And a lot of people, the old timers did, We had a regular route went around, and Freddie Hilton said, oh, no, I wouldn't get that. I wouldn't get milk. I'd just show you how people were. And I said, well, you always had cows. What did you do? You didn't pasteurize the milk. Oh, no, but I never used it. I said, I thought you made butter. Oh, I made butter. I said, but did you pasteurize the cream before you made the butter? She said, milk fever. You get milk fever if you have raw milk, see? All those years, she thought she was doing something smart, but not pasteurizing the milk, but she was making the butter out of the same milk. Geez, it was funny. Funny ideas people get like that, see? But we went all around town, all the old families. We had a lot of them down in Medalmic and places like that. Kenny Olson and Simmons, and half of them we delivered milk. Well, 10 years, that got kind of tiresome. And my son changed over to beef cattle. We had some Angus. Boy, they were good eating, those Angus cattle. But they were ornery. Oh, hard to handle. But we mostly had white-faced Herefords. And we had no trouble ever selling them. In fact, up to Waterville, the big slaughterhouse in Waterville, the rabbi, he got the meat for the Jewish people, and he blessed it. And he always bought ours. We always got a better price if we save the Herefords for him. But you were slaves to those things. You couldn't go away for a weekend or anything else, I never wanted to do it, but he wanted to do it, and I thought, well, let him go, let him see what he wanted to do. When I moved to Maine, I thought, well, my daughter went to Wellesley, and she didn't like it, and she transferred to Columbia, which she liked. She likes the city. She didn't really like it here either. In fact, she's been in Paris now for 30 years. What I did was, I noticed that around here, boat builders didn't really do much advertising. I thought, well, you know, I'll kind of train them. Well, they were hard nuts to crack, I'll tell you that. They were all spoiled. See, every time they launched a boat like Booth Bay, the paper gave a big write-up, and you know, they only thought in the local area. They didn't think in a national area. They were really backward, to tell you the truth. And so I thought, well, I went down to Harvey Gamby. At first, you know, he turned his back on me when I was taking a picture. And so I got him in a national magazine, a big spread, you know, building a schooner and something, and Sail magazine it was this size, like the National Fisherman. And he got a lot of orders for people, well, a lot of inquiries about what it would cost to build a schooner and boats and stuff, you know. And after that, he smiled at me. And first thing I know, every time I was around, he was posing like he was posing for animal crackers. I got a letter in there from Bob Woodard. He says, you really won't come up around here. But anyway, some of them, like Sonny Hodgson, had a lot of money. He wouldn't buy pictures. He thought I should give them to him. They were a little tight. They were hard to... The best guy around here was Paul Luke. Whatever pictures I took, he bought a whole set. And of course, I got him in yachting, and I got a lot of miles out of it, you know. At first, he had the idea that, well, I'll help you, but I want you to give me the last chance to see the story before it's published, he says, because all the reporters, he says, make mistakes, and I don't like that. I'd rather have nothing than have it said wrong. And I said, well, I don't do that. I says, I'm a professional. I said, you're a boat builder. I said, I'm not going to have you telling me how to write my story, and you're not going to have me telling you how to write my book, build your boat, see? Well, he didn't like it, but I got a story, and he complimented me on it. He said, gee, you didn't get anything wrong. So I never had any trouble with him. And as I say, I got a whole book upstairs of stories I wrote on Paul Luke. And it took time. Some of them were just tight. Windlash is very thrifty. He doesn't say tight, he says thrifty. He admits it. But he's very thrifty. And he'd worry more about, well, now, what do other guys do? I said, never mind what other guys do. I said, you know, how much do they pay you? That's what he wanted to know, see. And some of them, well, they really had been spoiled by the weekly papers, see. And Sonny Hodgson thought, and then Sonny, he finally got so I sold him quite a few pictures, but he got so his son was coming up. His son that one's now dead, but his son went to Dartmouth actually and became a doctor, and he got AIDS and died. And but
so were you doing write-ups too? I mean, for these papers, were you doing writing the stories?
Well, that's one thing. And then I got trapped by Jim Briggs, who was a classmate of mine at Dartmouth, and he had 2 daughters and 2 sons, and every time they got married, he called me up, and he wanted me to do their weddings. Well, I did the weddings, so I said, well, I'll write the story, you know. Well, see, Dinsmore and guys like that didn't do that, see. First thing, I finally, Larry Fitton and he moved to Noble after he retired from Princeton, Mass., and he and I had gone to Europe together to a Boy Scout Jamboree in 1933. So he moved here, and I got to know him, and his daughter was getting married, and I turned him down. He never forgave me. I thought, of course, he'd live longer, but he didn't. He died, unfortunately, before I could make it up to him. But he didn't like it, but I said, look, I'm trapped. I'm doing a wedding every weekend. I hate them. And I said, it takes a lot of time, and I said, well, wouldn't with him, but I said with other people, I had trouble with the money, too. No matter how you figured it, you had them pay you ahead, okay. Then they ordered extra pictures. No matter how you did it, they stuck you one way or the other. And then I had a special thing for colored. Nobody would buy colored much when I started, and I wanted to encourage that. And I had a special right, if you bought a set of color, it was so much, but the second set I could sell you cheaper, see? Well, like Dr. Powell's daughter got married, and his daughter made out all this, I had these forms made out, and so she ordered, to get the price, the price, she ordered 2 of each, see? So I had them made. Oh, I forgot her name. You probably know her, because everybody knows her. She was such a hellcat. Mm-hmm. She taught at Lincoln Academy till she retired.
Oh, Ginny?
Yeah.
Ginny Powell?
Ginny Powell,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And, she's a spitfire. She hates everybody anyway. But anyway, Powell's, with all their money, they schemed that they buy get the double rate, but they'd only take one set, and I don't know when they were going to take the other set, but they expected to get it. I said, well, you ordered them. They're all done right here. This is the bill. Oh, boy, she didn't speak to me since. Never spoke to me again. But, of course, the daughter wanted them, and she didn't want to pay for them. I don't know. You get in those things, see. And then I had another guy, he went around the wedding Jones up, and, it started getting out. I was getting Augusta and every place. I had nothing to do but do weddings. Geez, I got sick of them. And one guy, Jones, he's dead now, but God, he's running around. He bought whiskey by the gallons at his daughter's thing, He had all kinds of money for whiskey and everything else, and God, 6 or 8 months later, I was still trying to get paid, And then his wife insulted the hell out of me, called me everything under the sun. And then I had trouble. The young kids meant all right, but the first thing, the girl's going to have a baby. They got to pay for the baby, see? And they still owe the photographer. Then they had to get an apartment or furniture. You're at the end of the line getting paid, see? I got out of that. I'll tell you a funny thing. When I came here, I had New York plates on my car. So I knew the law, because I've been in Florida. I had to keep hiding my car, because if you work there, you have to get Florida plates, see? And I knew you had to do the same thing in Maine. I was here 3 months and couldn't get Carl Hilton. See, Carl and Louis Oger ran the town, and John Miller and Fred Payne were the big Republicans in Waldoboro, and Payne had been the governor, and they sort of told Carl what to do. He had to do what they wanted. And they asked me, they found out that I was a Democrat. And Carl said, oh, well, you'll change. Once you're here, you'll change. Everybody changes, becomes Republican when they come here. And I never did. And I had to go all the way to Augusta to get my number plates. He would not give them to me. He and his wife wouldn't give them to me. They wanted to be able to say that the Republicans were here, see? Well, now I started doing work for, I think it was Muskie, for the Democrats, and your paper wouldn't print anything I sent. They wouldn't print it at all, see? Oh, they were really, really down on the Democrats then. They've changed a lot now, of course. But of course, everything's changed, But I thought that was kind of funny when I think about it. I helped organize the first Democratic club and wrote a hoodlet and guys all around. I knew quite a lot of them. And as I say, when it came to, Hubert Humphrey was running for president and Muskie was going to be vice president, I was the only photographer allowed into the meeting. They had all the leaders from all over Maine come over to, it was supposed to be in Cabbage Island, but they had it at Pine Point, is it, in Booth Bay? The point out there, whatever the famous point is. But we would meet there and go up to Cabbage Island. Well, it rained so bad we couldn't go to Cabbage Island. But anyway, I got pictures of Hubert Humphrey and Muskie teaching him how to eat a lobster and all that stuff, I got quite a lot of stuff. And then when Curtis became governor at the inaugural, I was up there, and they helped me a lot there. I think I'm working on a story now for Yankee. I'm going to try to use that picture, but it's the only picture taken when the Democrats had all the big jobs in Maine, from the governor to senators, everybody. Everybody was a Democrat. Hathaway, Husky, Muskie, and the guy who got divorced down at Booth Bay. Anyway, I got them all with their wives in a colored picture. I haven't used it. I've been saving it all these years, but I'm going to try to use that one. Yeah. So anyway, and I got a nice letter from Hubert Humphrey and all that stuff. I was kind of sorry that Muskie didn't get a chance at it. I did a lot of campaigning with him here too. But anyway, I thought of something else then. Oh, when I was racing, I never was lucky about stories, you know. I sat next to a guy named Arthur Flans in Utica, New York. He's the luckiest guy I've ever known on a story. One night he was out walking his cat on the main street, Genesee Street in Lewiston, in Utica, and the front of the bank blew up. And he's walking by. Another time, a lady wanted to find her son that she'd given away once. He found him. Somehow he got a quirk that the kid might be in the Navy, and he checked with the Navy, and he found the kid was in Hawaii. He was an officer in the Navy. Geez, I don't know. I never had anything like that. Ernie King was a photographer, and he made they used to have the big picture page on Life magazine, and Ernie King got a call one day at Utica, and this kind of luck I never had. And they called him down along the Mohawk River. They had a business down there, and they said a deer just jumped in the office window. And Ernie was smart. He said, whatever you do, don't let him go out the window till I get there. Stand in front of him or something, see? And evidently they did. And he went down, and he got his camera all set up on the window, all focused and everything. And then he said, now chase him out. And they chased him out. And it's in Life magazine on the back page, you know. And there was the deer coming out through the window again, see? Of course, more glass, not as much, but some glass flew up too. And I don't know, the editor never caught on that deer was going the wrong way when they took the pictures, see? Well, anyway, I started to tell you, when I got to Vernon, Ed Keller was quite a sharp guy on horses. And he said, you know, we got a horse coming in here. He said, I think it's going to make a world record. I said, yes, yeah. I said, Adios, Harry. He said, yep. And he says he's going out, I think it was Tuesday, he's going to give him a pretty fast workout on Tuesday. Well, we had a guy 90 years old who had lived at Vernon all his life, and he'd always been with harness horses, and he ran an inn there. And Gil Wetmore was his name. He's 90 years old, he bought a car, and the upholstery in the car was all pink. You know, we called it his passion car, you know, 90 years old. Anyway, I'm down on the track, and I'm getting my camera and some film all ready, and this guy's going out on the track with his horse, see, and we had a 3/4 mile track, which is one of the fastest in the country, and you come out of a chute, and then you go the 3/4 mile. So you don't go by the grandstand twice. So anyway, Gil came down. As the guy was coming around the track, Gil came down in his car. He drove on the track. See, he was 90 years old, and he wanted to see what was going on. He drove down the track. Of course, it's a wide track. You could have 10 to 12 horses across. So he was in by the grandstand right there, and he drove his car down there. And Jesus, this horse was coming up the track, and I'm getting pictures, you know. And anyway, the guy goes around, and so when he got around again, I got another picture too, you know, and he was going a good clip. And boy, the driver was some mad. The old guy driving the horse, he said, who the hell is that nut over there, he says. See? And Gil's looking at the clock, you know. He says, my God. He's looking at he had a timer. He was the official track timer, but this time you're just doing it by hand. And the guy's saying, oh, my horse ran away from me. See? It was the owner of the horse, see? And I said, well, I got a good picture of him anyway. He didn't fall. And I went away, and Gil was muttering, you know, about a world's record. Evidently, he went to world's record while I was taking the picture. Anyway, I've got that picture. I got a big one upstairs like this. I'm going to try to sell it to a horse room or something. But anyway, he's got all 4 feet off the ground, you know. It's a perfect picture. I laid down on my belly, and I had seen a picture where there was a fence in the distance, and the guy had taken the picture, and the fence was under the horse, but I didn't have the right distance. It didn't come out that way, but I got all 4 feet off the ground. It's in the Hall of Fame at Goshen, New York, and from then on, I went to Batavia, and I went to Montreal, wherever Adios Harry went, I went and got some pictures. See, yeah, he was the first modern day pacing record, Of course, they've broken it many times since. The tracks get better all the time. That's one thing that helps them to break them. But anyway, it's 155. Yeah. The last time a record was broken was 1938, and in 1955, that was the first time it was broken, and I got the picture of it. So I got of course, I got thousands of negatives on horses. I don't know what I'll ever do with them. They're all upstairs in the attic. I got them from I got them from Florida, and from Lexington, Kentucky, Ohio, the Brown Jug track at Ohio. I can't think of the name of it now. And I got them from all the fairs. And every time, if a track was closed or something, I'd shoot off to a fair. I didn't care where it was. I'd go, and then once I got the trailer, I'd just go over and plug in the hose and electricity. In 20 minutes, I'd be making pictures. And so I got all those filed up there. I tried to sell them to the museum in Goshen, but you can't sell stuff to museums. They want it for nothing. And the guy said, well, if you give them to us, we'd be glad to have them, but you give them to us and you can get them off your income tax. I said, I got a better idea. Abel Harriman is one of the guy ran for president. I said, he was one of the trustees at the time. I said, I got a better idea. I said, you buy them, or have Abel Harriman buy them, and he can give them to you and take them off his income tax. They were the world champions of that day, Good Counsel and Torpid, all of them. We had the American Pacing Derby, and then I took a lot of them, like Woolworth up in Monmouth, has a farm up there in Monmouth, Maine, and it's one of his breeding farms. And he had Egyptian Princess. I took that down in North Carolina. And I have a lot of them. But, let me say, well, I got a room upstairs, must have 500 boxes, 8 by 10 boxes. Like you saw some in there, but I got more than that, many more. About 500 of them. And each one's got the name of a horse, or not a horse, a boat.
So that was your other thing, besides the horses and the boat photographs.
Yeah. Well, as I say, I stopped the horses altogether. Well, there wasn't the money in Maine, and it wasn't as nice either. The tracks weren't as nice. Even the restrooms were crappy. I don't know. You ought to see Hinsdale today. Jimmy and I were over there a couple months ago, and we stopped in, Of course, they got simulcast and all that, But gosh, they've dressed it up like it's Las Vegas or someplace. And that track, of course, they quit the horses. They went to the dogs, and I'm not sure just how they're doing it now, because they got a lot of horses run on the TV, on the simulcast,
Did you ever work Rockingham?
Huh?
Did you ever go to work Rockingham?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I knew old Smith. What was his name? He had his name in the paper all the time. He was always given something. That's how he played the politics, to keep Rockingham licensed. And I was friends with Al Winger, who was one of the leading drivers there. I used to go and see him. Lou Smith. Yeah, at Salem, New Hampshire. Why, did you ever go there?
Well, it's next door to me.
Yeah.
It's in Derry.
Yeah.
But
Well, Al Winger had a farm there once, breeding horses.
I was too young to go to the track.
Yeah. How old are you now?
56.
56? I guess my son's a little older than you are. Yeah.
Well, I think we probably had enough for today.